The call came on a gray Wednesday morning. I was halfway through grading essays when my mother's voice cracked through the phone. "Philip, your father and I sold the house." I almost dropped my pen. "What house?" "Our old one," she said softly. "The one you grew up in." I laughed, thinking she was joking. That house was more than a building. It was where I'd scrape my knees on the porch, where Dad taught me to ride a bike, where Mom planted roses every spring. "You can't sell it," I said. "That's our family home." "It was," she corrected. "We needed the money and you live in the city now." Her tone was calm, rehearsed. Behind her words, I heard guilt. I asked when it happened. "Last week," she said. "It's already final." Final. My throat tightened. "You didn't even tell me." "You were busy, Philip. We didn't want to burden you." I hung up without another word. For a few minutes, I just sat there staring at the wall, feeling something inside me splinter. They hadn't just sold wood and nails. They'd sold my childhood, and they hadn't even thought I'd care. That night, I drove the 3 hours back to my hometown, even though the highway was soaked with rain. The closer I got, the heavier my chest felt. When I turned down Maple Drive, the street looked smaller than I remembered, like time had folded it in. The house stood at the end, white shutters, red door, the oak tree still leaning toward the fence. Except now, there was a sold sign on the lawn. I parked and sat in silence. Lights glowed inside. Someone was already living there. I wanted to knock, to demand answers, but instead I drove to my parents' place across town. Mom opened the door, surprised. "Philip, why are you here? Why do you think?" I said. Dad appeared behind her, adjusting his glasses like he hadn't expected to see me so soon. We sat in the kitchen. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and tension. Dad cleared his throat. "We're not getting any younger, son. The taxes were high." "You could have told me," I said. "I would have helped." Mom looked down at her hands. "We didn't want your pity." "It's not pity, Mom. It's respect. You should have trusted me." They didn't answer. Only the clock ticked, loud and merciless. The next morning, I drove back to the house. Curiosity, or maybe grief, pulled me there. A moving truck stood in the driveway. A man in a baseball cap was unloading boxes. I rolled down my window. "Hi, I'm Philip. I grew up here." He smiled politely. "Nice place. We just closed last week. Heard the last owners left in a hurry." In a hurry? That didn't sound like my parents. They were meticulous about everything. He introduced himself as Mark, an engineer who'd moved from Atlanta. His wife waved from the porch. "I hope they didn't leave you any mess," I said. "Just a few old photo albums in the attic," he said. "I'll keep them until they come for them." Photo albums. My chest tightened again. As I drove away, I kept replaying his words in a hurry. My parents were hiding something. That evening I called my sister Lily, who lived in Texas. She hesitated before answering. "You heard, huh?" she said. "So you knew?" She sighed. "They told me not to tell you. They said you'd make a scene." "A scene? It's my home, too." "I know. Phil," but they were desperate. "Dad's been gambling again." Her words landed like stones. Suddenly, everything made sense. I confronted Dad that same night. He was watching TV, pretending nothing was wrong. "Gambling," I said. He froze. "Lily shouldn't have told you that." "So it's true?" His shoulders slumped. "I made a few bad bets. Your mother doesn't know the full amount." My stomach dropped. "How bad?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Mom walked in with tea. "What's going on?" I looked at her. "You sold the house to cover Dad's debts, didn't you?" Her hand trembled. "It wasn't just that. We had medical bills, too. You don't understand." "You're right," I said sharply. "I don't understand lying to your own son." Dad's voice cracked. We were ashamed. I took a deep breath, fighting the anger rising in my chest. "You could have trusted me. Instead, you sold every memory I had." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't mean to hurt you." But they had. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about pride and the belief that I Their son wasn't part of the family decisions anymore. I couldn't stay there. I checked into a motel by the highway and sat staring at the ceiling. My parents had gambled away more than money. They'd gambled away trust. The next morning, I stopped at the local cafe. The waitress, Mrs. Kemp, had known me since I was a kid. "Philip Bernard," she said, smiling. "Back for a visit?" Something like that. When I told her about the house, her smile faded. "Your folks sold it?" "Everyone's been talking. They say it was rushed. Strange, too. The buyer paid below market price." "Below market?" I frowned. Why would they do that? She shrugged. Maybe they just wanted to be rid of it. Or maybe someone else had wanted it badly enough to make them a quiet deal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop and searched property records. The sale was listed to a temporary holding company, not to Mark at all. Something wasn't right. The new family might not be who they said they were. And if I wanted the truth, I'd have to dig deeper. The next day, I drove to the county clerk's office. The building smelled like dust and old paper. I asked for the sale file for 14 Maple Drive. The clerk handed me a thin folder. Inside was a deed transfer signed by my parents and a corporate buyer called Blue Pines Holdings. My brow furrowed. "Can I see who's behind that company?" She clicked through her computer. Registered agent's a lawyer named Dana Hughes. I knew that name. She'd been Dad's attorney years ago when he refinanced the house. I thanked the clerk and left, pulse quickening. If Dana was involved, this sale wasn't a simple debt fix. It was orchestrated. I called her office. She agreed to meet the next morning. When I arrived, Dana looked uncomfortable. "Philip, I shouldn't be talking to you about this." "Please," I said. "I just want to understand why my childhood home was sold in secret." She sighed. "Your father came to me months ago. He was desperate, but he didn't just sell the house. He transferred it to pay off a private debt." "To who?" She hesitated. "Someone close to the family." My stomach turned. "Who?" "Your Uncle James." Uncle James. My father's older brother. A man I hadn't spoken to in years after a bitter inheritance fight over our grandfather's land. So that was it. Dad had sold my childhood home to his own brother to settle old debts. I left Dana's office shaking. Anger buzzed in my veins like electricity. I drove straight to Uncle James's estate. His mansion loomed behind tall iron gates. When he opened the door, he smiled thinly. "Philip, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "You bought our house," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Correction, I acquired it." "Why?" "Your father owed me. Simple as that." "You manipulated him." I shot back. He shrugged. "Business is business. Besides, I've already resold it." "To whom?" "That's confidential," he said smugly. I clenched my fists. "You're playing with memories that aren't yours." James chuckled. "Sentiment doesn't pay debts, nephew." As I drove away, I realized the truth. My family didn't just break trust, they commodified it. And the only way to reclaim my past was to expose them all. I stayed in town, renting a small apartment while I pieced things together. The betrayal still burned, but something inside me hardened into resolve. I started talking to people, neighbors, friends, even the realtor who handled the sale. Everyone said the same thing. It had been rushed, quiet, almost secretive. Then one night, while walking past the old house, I saw lights on and heard laughter inside. I froze in the dark. Through the window, I recognized a familiar silhouette. Uncle James. He wasn't supposed to be there. He'd said he'd sold it. The next day, I returned during daylight and saw a moving van pulling out. The driver told me, "Just finished clearing out the furniture Mr. James stored here." Stored? Not sold. That's when the idea started forming. A way to reclaim more than a deed. A way to reclaim my dignity. But first, I needed proof. Proof that the sale was a cover-up. I began collecting documents, old financial records, emails Lily forwarded from Dad. The picture grew clearer. My parents hadn't just been victims. They'd helped hide James's money trail. And when I was ready, I'd make sure everyone saw it. The opportunity came faster than I expected. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary was in 2 weeks, and they were throwing a big dinner at the church hall. The whole family would be there, including Uncle James. I decided that would be the night, but I needed one more thing: access to the house. Mark, the supposed new owner, turned out to be one of James's employees. When I confronted him privately, he looked nervous. I just followed orders. Mr. James said the place was temporary storage. He's planning to flip it later. Would you let me inside for a few minutes? I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. Walking through those rooms again was like stepping into a ghost. My old bedroom still smelled faintly of cedar and paint. On the mantel sat one of Mom's photo frames, left behind. I took a picture. That frame would become my proof. By the time I left, my plan was clear. I wouldn't call the police or sue anyone. I'd let their own lies collapse under the weight of truth, where everyone could see. The night of the anniversary, the hall glowed with string lights and fake smiles. I walked in quietly, wearing a dark suit. My mother hugged me, relieved I'd come. "Oh, Philip, we're so glad you're here. Wouldn't miss it," I said, my tone neutral. Dad clapped my shoulder. "Let's put the past behind us tonight, son." "Sure," I said. "After all, family's everything, right?" He nodded, missing the edge of my voice. As dinner began, people gave toasts about love, endurance, and family values. I waited until the end, when Dad stood to thank everyone. Then I rose. Before we finish, I said loudly, "I'd like to share something too." All eyes turned to me. I want to thank my parents for teaching me honesty, especially about property sales and secret debts. Murmurs spread. Mom's face went pale. Uncle James shifted uncomfortably. I held up the framed photo I'd taken from the house. "Recognize this? You left it behind when you emptied our home, Dad. The home you sold to pay James here." Gasps filled the room. "Maybe you can tell everyone why you did it," I said. And just like that, silence fell like a blade. Dad's face turned crimson. "Philip not here. Why not?" I asked. "You wanted a family celebration. Let's celebrate the truth." Whispers rippled through the crowd. My cousins exchanged looks. Mom rose, trembling. "Please stop this." "No, Mom. You stopped telling the truth months ago." Uncle James stood, his voice oily. "This is uncalled for." "Uncalled for?" I said. "You bought our home for pennies and lied about it. You made my father your puppet." He sneered. "You think you're the hero, but you know nothing of responsibility." "I know manipulation when I see it." I shot back. The pastor stepped forward, trying to calm things down, but the damage was done. Guests were whispering. Phones were recording, and the Bernard's spotless reputation cracked like glass. Mom covered her face. Dad sat down heavily, staring at the floor. For a long moment, no one moved. Then I said softly, "You could have told me the truth, and I would have helped. But instead, you sold your son's trust for your brother's approval." And I walked out into the cool night air, leaving the weight of generations behind me. The fallout was immediate. By morning, half the family had called or texted. Some were angry, others curious. My parents didn't answer their phones. I spent the day wandering the park near the house, feeling strangely calm. The truth was finally out. That evening, Lily called. "You really did it," she said. "Someone had to." "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "They've controlled the story for years. Now everyone sees it." But part of me still ached. I hadn't wanted to destroy them. I'd wanted them to see. 2 days later, Dad called. His voice was hoarse. "You humiliated us." I told the truth. "There are things you don't understand." "Then make me understand," I said. After a long pause, he whispered, "Your mother and I didn't just sell for debt. We thought if James owned it, he'd keep it in the family. We were wrong." He hung up before I could answer. For the first time, I realized their betrayal wasn't pure greed. It was fear. Fear of losing status, control, and me. Days turned into weeks. Gossip spread like wildfire. Uncle James tried to spin the story, claiming he'd rescued my parents from financial ruin. But few believed him after my public confrontation. One afternoon, Mark, the fake buyer, found me at the cafe. Mr. Bernard, he said, glancing around nervously. Mr. James told me to destroy some documents. I couldn't. He slid an envelope across the table. Inside were receipts showing James had funneled money through shell accounts used in the house sale. This is enough to ruin him, Mark said. I looked at the papers, then shook my head. No, let him ruin himself. Instead, I scanned them and sent them anonymously to the local paper. Within a week, an article exposed James's shady dealings. His company's contracts were frozen. My parents were publicly tied to the scandal but portrayed as victims of manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were finally seen as victims, but the very man they trusted over their own son. And for once, I didn't feel angry, just tired. Mom showed up at my apartment one rainy evening. She stood in the doorway, hair damp, eyes swollen. "Can we talk?" I nodded and let her in. She sat quietly for a moment, staring at her hands. "I saw the article," she said. "You didn't write it, did you?" "No," I said, "but it was the truth." She nodded slowly. "Your father hasn't slept. He says he sees you every time he closes his eyes." I didn't know what to say. "We thought we were protecting you," she whispered. "From shame, from our mistakes." "You protected your pride," I said softly. "Not me." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "We lost the house, and then we lost you." I sighed. "You didn't lose me, Mom. You pushed me away." She reached for my hand, hesitant. "Can we ever fix this?" I looked at her, at the woman who'd once read me bedtime stories, and now sat trembling before me. "Maybe," I said, "but not until you stop hiding behind excuses." She nodded. "Then we'll start there." Over the next few weeks, things shifted. Mom began calling more often, not to defend herself, but to ask how I was doing. Dad, though, stayed silent. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. His handwriting. "Son," it began, "I can't undo what I've done, but I can tell you the truth." He confessed everything. The debts, the pride, the deal with James. He'd been too ashamed to admit he'd lost control. He ended with, "I hope one day you can walk into that house again without pain." I folded the letter carefully. Later that week, I visited the property. Police tape still hung near the gate from the investigation into James's finances. The house looked empty again. Through the window, I could see dust dancing in the afternoon sun. It felt like the building was waiting for a new chapter. And maybe so was I. Months passed. Life found a quiet rhythm. I focused on work, reconnected with old friends, and even started dating again. But every time I drove by Maple Drive, I felt a pull. Then one morning, a real estate notice appeared online. Property at 14 Maple Drive, auction due to asset forfeiture. James's downfall had left the house in government hands. I stared at the listing for a long time. I could afford it. But did I want to? Buy it back felt symbolic, but also risky, like reopening an old wound. That night, I dreamed of being a boy again, running to the hallway while Mom called me for dinner. When I woke, I knew what I had to do. Not for revenge, not even for nostalgia, but for closure. I placed a silent bid, under my own name this time. And then I waited. The call came 2 weeks later. "Mr. Bernard," said the auction officer, "congratulations. You're the new owner of 14 Maple Drive." I sat there for a full minute before answering. "Thank you." When I drove down that familiar road again, the house looked tired but standing, like it had weathered the storm and was ready for peace. I walked through the empty rooms. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood. In the living room, I found a small nail hole where our family portrait used to hang. I traced it with my finger. This time, I didn't feel anger. I felt acceptance. Later that week, I invited my parents to see it. They hesitated, but finally agreed. When they stepped inside, Mom gasped softly. "It looks just like before." Dad's eyes filled with tears. How did you afford it?" "I didn't steal it," I said quietly. "I earned it." And for the first time in months, he met my eyes without shame. We sat on the porch, the same spot where he'd taught me to ride my bike. The evening sun turned everything gold. Dad cleared his throat. "You know, I used to think providing meant control. That as long as I decided we'd be safe. And now, I asked, now I know safety comes from honesty. Mom nodded beside him. We hurt you, Philip. I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I'm working on it, I said. She smiled faintly. I'm glad you brought it back. Maybe it'll bring peace to all of us. Maybe, I said. That night, after they left, I sat in the quiet house listening to the creak of the floorboards. It wasn't ghosts I heard. It was memories settling. And somewhere in the silence, forgiveness started to grow. News of my purchase spread quickly. The same people who'd whisper about our family now whispered again, this time with admiration. I ignored the gossip. I didn't buy the house for attention. But one Sunday, as I left the cafe, an elderly neighbor stopped me. Your parents are proud of you, you know, she said. They talk about how you saved what they lost. Maybe they finally see that it wasn't about property. I replied, it was about trust. She smiled. Then you've already rebuilt the foundation. I spent the next weeks restoring the house. Fresh paint, new curtains, small repairs. It wasn't the same as before, but maybe that was the point. When I stood in the finished living room, sunlight flooding in, I realized this house wasn't just my past anymore. It was proof that pain could become something beautiful if you let it. One evening, Lily flew in from Texas to see it. Wow, she said, looking around. It feels alive again. I guess it's home, I said. She hugged me. I'm proud of you, Phil. You didn't just take revenge. You healed. I laughed softly, still working on that part. We cooked dinner in the old kitchen, played music, and talked about everything we'd ignored for years. Later, sitting on the porch, she said, do you ever think Mom and Dad sold the house because they thought they'd already lost us? Maybe, I said, but selling it made sure they did. She nodded. At least we found our way back. I looked at the stars and thought how every broken thing can still shine under the right light. A few months later, I hosted a small gathering at the house, just close friends and neighbors. No speeches, no drama. Just laughter, music, and food. Mom and Dad came too. They looked nervous at first, but everyone welcomed them kindly. When dinner ended, Dad stood and raised a glass. To my son, he said quietly, who taught me that truth doesn't destroy, it rebuilds. The room fell silent, then filled with soft applause. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you for giving us another chance. I smiled. Thank you for taking it. That night, after everyone left, I found myself standing in the doorway, watching the moonlight spill across the floor. For the first time since that awful phone call a month ago, the house felt peaceful. And so did I. Time passed gently after that. My parents started therapy, something I never thought they'd do. Dad quit gambling. Mom began volunteering at the church again. We weren't the perfect family, but we were honest now, and that was enough. Sometimes I catch Dad staring at the house, almost reverently. Feels like it's yours now, he said once. It was always ours. I told him. We just forgot what that meant. He smiled. You remind me of your grandfather. Stubborn and good-hearted. Guess that's a compliment. I said. He chuckled. It is. The oak tree in the yard had grown wider, its branches like arms stretched toward the sky. I'd come to see it as a symbol, not of what we'd lost, but what we'd survived. And under its shade, the past finally rested. One spring morning, I received a letter from the county office. It contained the final deed, confirming me as the sole owner. As I held the paper, I felt a quiet closure wash over me. I visited my parents that afternoon. Mom served coffee on the porch. Full circle, she said softly. Yeah, I said, but it's different now. She smiled sadly. Different to be good. Dad added, you know, Philip, when you stood up at that dinner, I thought I'd lost you forever, but you saved us from ourselves. I just told the truth, I said. He shook his head. You reminded us what truth feels like. We sat in comfortable silence, the kind families earn after years of noise. And for once, the air between us felt clear, like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. A year later, I decided to turn the house into something new, not just a home, but Retreat, a small program for local kids who needed mentorship. I called it the Maple Project. Every Saturday, a group of teens came by to paint, garden, or learn carpentry. One afternoon, as we planted new roses where Mom's garden once grew, she joined us. The kids called her Mrs. B, and she laughed in a way I hadn't heard in years. Dad came by with lemonade, joking with the kids about how he once broke that same fence post. Watching them, I realized we'd built something better than before. The house that once symbolized betrayal now stood for rebuilding. Sometimes healing doesn't erase the past. It transforms it. And as the sun dipped low, the house glowed like forgiveness itself. A few months later, I hosted a small gathering at the house, just close friends and neighbors. No speeches, no drama, just laughter, music, and food. Mom and Dad came too. They looked nervous at first, but everyone welcomed them kindly. When dinner ended, Dad stood and raised a glass. "To my son," he said quietly, "who taught me that truth doesn't destroy, it rebuilds." The room fell silent, then filled with soft applause. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for giving us another chance." I smiled. "Thank you for taking it." That night, after everyone left, I found myself standing in the doorway, watching the moonlight spill across the floor. For the first time since that awful phone call months ago, the house felt peaceful. And so did I. Time passed gently after that. My parents started therapy, something I never thought they'd do. Dad quit gambling. Mom began volunteering at the church again. We weren't the perfect family, but we were honest now, and that was enough. Sometimes I catch Dad staring at the house, almost reverently. "Feels like it's yours now," he said once. "It was always ours," I told him. "We just forgot what that meant." He smiled. "You remind me of your grandfather. Stubborn and good-hearted." "Guess that's a compliment," I said. He chuckled. "It is." The oak tree in the yard had grown wider, its branches like arms stretched toward the sky. I'd come to see it as a symbol, not of what we'd lost, but what we'd survived. And under its shade, the past finally rested. One spring morning, I received a letter from the county office. It contained the final deed, confirming me as the sole owner. As I held the paper, I felt a quiet closure wash over me. I visited my parents that afternoon. Mom served coffee on the porch. "Full circle," she said softly. "Yeah," I said, "but it's different now." She smiled sadly. "Different can be good." Dad added, "You know, Philip, when you stood up at that dinner, I thought I'd lost you forever. But you saved us from ourselves." "I just told the truth," I said. He shook his head. "You reminded us what truth feels like." We sat in comfortable silence, the kind families earn after years of noise. And for once, the air between us felt clear, like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. A year later, I decided to turn the house into something new. Not just a home, but Retreat, a small program for local kids who needed mentorship. I called it the Maple Project. Every Saturday, a group of teens came by to paint, garden, or learn carpentry. One afternoon, as we planted new roses where Mom's garden once grew, she joined us. The kids called her Mrs. B, and she laughed in a way I hadn't heard in years. Dad came by with lemonade, joking with the kids about how he once broke that same fence post. Watching them, I realized we'd built something better than before. The house that once symbolized betrayal now stood for rebuilding. Sometimes healing doesn't erase the past. It transforms it. And as the sun dipped low, the house glowed like forgiveness itself. One evening, after everyone had left, I sat alone on the porch. The wind rustled through the oak leaves. I thought about the journey, the shock, the anger, the heartbreak, and the quiet redemption that followed. If you told me a year ago that I'd forgive my parents, I would have laughed. But now I understood something deeper. Forgiveness isn't letting someone off the hook. It's letting yourself be free. Inside, the house creaked softly, as if agreeing. I raised my glass to the sky. "Here's to second chances." I whispered. The moonlight spilled over the yard, touching the roses, the porch, the path I'd once walked barefoot as a child. I smiled. feeling both the weight and the lightness of everything I'd endured. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's proving to yourself that you can rise without them. And as the night settled around me, I realized something simple and true. Sometimes the only way to go home is to rebuild it yourself. The end. The end.